I've joined the Rawvolution at Naturaw because I know that not all raw food is created equal. I'm passionate about feeding dogs as nature intended. After all, you are what you eat, and so is your dog. At Naturaw, there are no compromises, no confusion, just real raw food made with integrity and a conscience, offering 100% transparency, supporting British farmers, and only using the highest welfare assured ingredients is so important. They're a certified B Corp and reduce their carbon footprint by utilizing solar power and planting trees. They only use completely plastic-free packaging that's home compostable. Prudence and Mr. Binks are simply loving their nutrient-dense and balanced recipes. So try Naturaw today. Just go to naturaw.co.uk and grab 20% off your first purchase with my code AnnaWebb20. Join the Rawvolution and feed exceptional raw food. Hello, I'm Anna Webb, and welcome to this episode of A Dog's Life. In this episode, we're discussing prehistoric dogs and arguably finding the missing link with Dr. Gregor Larson. And this episode is powered by Antonov. Gregor Larson, welcome back to A Dog's Life.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's brilliant. I so loved our last episode talking about cats, discovering, that they're about, if I remember rightly, 5 million years old. Is that right? Am I right?
Sure. Let's go with that.
Okay, that's great. I'm now a scientist. But with dogs, there's this brilliant piece that was published in Nature, I think I'm right, in about March or April, highlighting that dogs have been with us by our side for even longer than we thought. Explain, Gregor, what was discovered and what it's revealed.
Well, there were two papers back to back in that same issue, both of which were revealing dogs that were far older than previous dogs that had been genetically assessed about whether they were more doggy or more wolfy. And prior to this, the earliest dog that was genetically confirmed was about 11,000 years old. And now these two papers revealed a couple of dogs that were 14,000 plus, and then another dog that was nearly 16,000 years old.
Oh my gosh. So were both of these dogs found in Somerset, or was one found somewhere else?
No, all three found in very different locations. So the 16,000-year-old dog was found at a site called Pınarbaşı in Turkey on the Konya Plain. It was about a 14,000-year-old dog found in Switzerland, and then another 14 and a half thousand-year-old dog found in Goff's Cave, which is in Somerset, very near Glastonbury.
Right. Gosh, there you go. And what is this? I mean, this, I assume, having read in the news about this, these dogs were, kept by humans before we did any farming. So, there wasn't the need to protect flocks. There wasn't the need to herd the flocks at this time. So, what were the dogs doing apart from guarding us?
That's a really great question. It's difficult to know precisely what sort of jobs they were doing. I mean, dogs, one thing that distinguishes dogs from all other domestic animals is just that if we have a job that needs doing, a dog's going to find a way to do it in a way that very few other animals, if any, have any hope of even considering. When you just consider the sheer range throughout all of human history of things that we have managed to get dogs to do for us, or at least assist us with, it's really pretty staggering. And so given that choice, it's hard to know precisely which one of those things dogs were doing 16,000 years ago or 14,000 years ago all across Europe. What is pretty interesting, though, is, as you rightly say, all of these human groups, though they likely had very different languages, they were living in very different environments. I mean, Goff's Cave at 14,000 years ago looks very different than Turkey at 16,000 years ago, where it's probably far warmer. You've got a lot of different resources available to you. Even things like day length and temperature are just going to be radically different between those two places. And yet, both of these communities, which were hunter gatherers, had dogs, and so that really gets pretty interesting because what it suggests is that this relationship between people and wolves had sort of transcended that wolfiness and become these dogs. And those dogs then were spread across all over Western Europe by 14, 15, 16,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, how are they all, are all of these samples, do they indicate, the similar DNA? I mean, is it possible to tell that there was a slightly different wolf behind them or not?
That's another good question. What's really interesting to us is that at about, say, 7 or 8 thousand years ago, what we start to see happening is that different people have different dogs. So much so that if you have the dog, you can identify which group of people they were with. And if you see the people, you can pretty much say what dog they had. And it means that the dogs and people have been existing and coexisting for such a long period of time that as they sort of spread out and distance themselves from each other, the dogs that were with the people kind of stayed with those people and thereby started to accumulate differences that mirrored the people's differences as they were moving about. But what's really interesting is that at 14,000 years ago, these three different dogs that we were talking about from Turkey, from Switzerland, also from Germany, then we discovered, as well as from Italy and several other places across Europe, all the way up into the UK, all of those dogs look ridiculously similar to each other. So the people are very different, but the dogs themselves, they're not sort of brothers and sisters, but they're kind of cousins. I mean, they don't really, genomically, it was really intriguing to us to see dogs that were 4,000 kilometers apart and only separated by about 1,000 years that looked very, very similar. And what it suggests to me is that this is early in the dog process. The dogs are a new thing. Everybody is very excited about this. And so dogs, therefore, are moving between human groups rather than necessarily with human groups, or at least exclusively with human groups, as they appear to be doing later. So it's almost like the analogy we've been using is like a Swiss Army knife. Like you have this new thing, and it's attractive and it's fashionable and it has all these new skill sets and it helps you out in an amazing way. And then you see a group of other people and you're like, you guys, you need one of these. These are amazing. Here, take this one and go along. And we think is happening is that these dogs are being, if not traded, then certainly moved between groups rather than with groups. And that would maybe describe why it is that you have basically the same dog present across 4,000 kilometers from Turkey to Britain at 15,000 years ago.
That's so funny, isn't it? After all, dogs are like their owners, that maybe that's where the expression comes from.
Oh, exactly. Yes, exactly.
So in all of these different settlements, I mean, I'm interested in the one in Somerset, obviously, because, we're in the UK. What would it have looked like, this settlement? Would the dogs have been outside or would they have been allowed in the cave?
Yeah, so these dog remains were actually found in the cave along with the human remains. And the human remains were made very famous a little while ago now, because a lot of analyses on the human remains suggested that there were cut marks on the human bones that may have been suggested that maybe the bones or the people were being, I don't want to say necessarily totally consumed, but at least the bones themselves were being treated in a way that kind of suggested a possible cannibalism. That has such a negative connotation that I'm not sure that I want to put that on those communities at the time. But what really is interesting to us is that the dog mandible that we were able to assess genetically, that it was in fact a dog, not only were the dietary isotopes from the dog, meaning the carbon and the nitrogen that were in the bones, exactly the same as the people, in fact, indistinguishable, suggesting very strongly that the people and the dogs had exactly the same diet, which is not a terrible surprise because most of us feed our dogs, if not table scraps, then certainly things from our table, or at least very happy for them to consume a lot of the things that we consume. But also that the bones of the people and the bones of the dogs were both being ritualistically treated after death. And again, we see that analogy in modern life where we bury our relatives and in cemeteries, or at least we have a kind of a post-death ritual, and we do the same with our pets. We have pet cemeteries and dog cemeteries. And so the fact that both of these kinds of bones were being treated after death in similar fashion suggests to me that what's happening here is that these dogs were already very much integrated into human societies to the degree that mirrors what we do now. They are effectively people in the same way that most people now consider their dogs to be a member of the family.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And also, I suppose the thought that there would be an afterlife, maybe, was going on at that time as well.
Sure, or just that. I mean, and we see this that tradition goes back a long way, using red ochre and doing burial traditions as kind of rites of passage into some sort of, whether that's an afterworld or some sort of treatment of those bones as a symbol of your love and care for that person in their lifetime. So the fact that that goes way back, and then we start seeing that with dogs at 14, at least by 14,000. In fact, at Pinnerbashi, it looks like there's some red ochre on the dog bones, and the dog bones there are buried in very close proximity to the human bones. So the same thing is happening in Turkey as it is in the UK about 1,000 years later. And again, suggesting that wherever people acquire these dogs as the maybe new thing, they instantly become not just fast friends, but members of those human groups to the same degree that the people are members of those human groups.
That's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, I can totally relate, obviously, being a massive animal lover, particularly dog lover. I mean, at that time, were there nasty predators around that
Oh, absolutely. And that, thank you for queuing that up. That's because in Goff's Cave, we not only found the dogs, we also found a wolf, which is really intriguing because it starts to then, I mean, this is it's a slightly larger mandible. Genomically, it's very distinguished from the dog, and it does not have the same dietary isotopes. It was eating completely different things, and its bones were not treated in the way that the dog bones were treated. So, from the human perspective, they definitely saw wolves as separate from dogs and treated them differently. What that wolf bone was doing in the cave, we don't know necessarily, but it was certainly conceived of and had a very different life than the dogs that were in the cave. So, in addition to wolves, though, and certainly in the UK, I mean, there were bears, there were some big cats around, there was all kinds of things that are now completely depauperate in the English landscape. But it was, it's only a couple thousand years after the last glacial maximum, and the island is kind of isostatically rebounding out of the North Sea, and the landscape it's very forested. And there's lots of deer, there's lots of large other game around. And so it would be a pretty rich place to go hunting, but as you say, full of big predators as well.
Yeah, so having a guard dog or a dog to alert to impending danger, would be a useful asset without doubt, right? So
Absolutely. I mean, but I don't think that we should necessarily sell short this idea that it's entirely possible the dogs were doing practical economic jobs, getting protein off the landscape or safety or anything else. But it could also very well be, given that they're being treated like the people, that these are companions maybe first and doing job second. I don't know that we should be conceiving of this totally in terms of what their utilitarian aspects were, but that these were genuinely members of those clans and those families.
yeah, that I think is the biggest point here. I mean, in one of the articles, I was just reminding myself of the story today, and they've recreated Goff's Cave, and there was like quite a wolf-like dog, in the middle of all these people doing their usual sort of things that you could, see like an early human settlement being developed, just hanging out. The dog was just hanging out. Yeah, I mean, I can really see that this would happen, because dogs really, still today give us this extra link. They're like an icebreaker with people. So I love that idea. You said that people would trade dogs, to make friends with people. Here, have one of my litter, and I'll take one of your litter, and then we'll maybe broaden the gene pool. Maybe they probably didn't know what to do, but I mean, maybe they did. Maybe they were geniuses that didn't rely on AI.
I think that it's tempting always to see people in the both remote and distant past as being quite different from us. And to a large degree, as you say, AI or just technology or just things like electricity or mobile phones or whatever, there are things that certainly we have access to. But I think the evidence is pretty strong that even if you go back 100 or 200,000 years, so well before there are dogs, cognitively and behaviorally and physically, all the people on Earth are indistinguishable from modern populations. And what's really intriguing to me is then that dogs show up seemingly around 1516. It's possible that it was a few thousand years before that. But for most of that time, of that last 200,000 years, there are no dogs. This is not a thing that people have done, is form these very close relationships with another species to the degree that they are treating them in the same way after they die that they're treating themselves. So there is a change then that happens. And I think that I don't know how intentional it is, but it is intriguing that about 15,000 years ago this happens, and from our perspective in the present, it is indistinguishable from all the dogs that are in all the houses in the UK and worldwide right now.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's like a switch, a light bulb moment for mankind happened 15,000 years ago. I absolutely love that. And we've not looked back. Look, I mean, we've got more dogs living in Britain. I bet that back then in Goth's Cave, they never imagined that there would be 15.5 million dogs living in the UK.
That's very
But,
true.
it's, I think dogs have, they turned something on in us which obviously has worked. They've got it, haven't they? I think the dogs win without a doubt.
I think what they're very good at doing is, and they're not alone in this regard, is tapping that empathy button, right? What you feel for your dog is so similar to what you probably feel for those humans that are closest to you that it is, at times anyway, indistinguishable. Going to bed with your dog at the foot of the bed, or just coming home from work and seeing a tail wagging through the window, all those kinds of things. And we are sort of the general, our behavioral sort of generalities. We can place that empathy, and other animals do this with imprinting on things as well, that it's a general enough signal, but it all hits that dopamine, and dogs are particularly good at doing that. And I think that was probably one of the drivers that led to this relationship that started somewhere between 15 and maybe 20,000 years ago.
I've joined the Rawvolution at Naturaw because I know that not all raw food is created equal. I'm passionate about feeding dogs as nature intended. After all, you are what you eat, and so is your dog. At Naturaw, there are no compromises, no confusion, just real raw food made with integrity and a conscience, offering 100% transparency, supporting British farmers, and only using the highest welfare assured ingredients is so important. They're a certified B Corp and reduce their carbon footprint by utilizing solar power and planting trees. They only use completely plastic-free packaging that's home compostable. Prudence and Mr. Binks are simply loving their nutrient-dense and balanced recipes. So try Naturaw today. Just go to naturaw.co.uk and grab 20% off your first purchase with my code AnnaWebb20. Join the Rawvolution and feed exceptional raw food. So, Gregor, after that period, in time, did mankind develop quicker? If we're thinking, with dogs by their side, man's best friend, to help them, they could maybe see the potential of dogs to do more things for them. Therefore, they were able to push their own boundaries. But again, with this dopamine thing, do you think this actually helped us create settlements, breed, be kind to each other, or not just fight each other the whole time? I don't know.
I think it's certainly tempting to speculate about all the different ways in which humans have shifted as a result of this very close relationship. And I think that the analogy for me is very similar to your own sort of spouse or partner, right? Like your life goes on a different trajectory when it's now wedded to somebody else's life, and in some cases actually wedded to somebody else's life, right? And that you can then start to think of the counterfactuals about how would my life be different if I wasn't with this person, or I didn't meet this person, and we eat the same things, and we like the same shows, and we travel together. And I think if you think about it in those perspectives, it certainly facilitates while also constraining as well, but maybe creatively. I mean, I'm not sure about how it may have changed our behavior, although that'd be a lot of fun to think about. But one thing I think is pretty clear is that people get to places with dogs that they may not have gotten to without dogs. There's some speculation about the Americas that people bring dogs into the Americas right when they first arrive, and maybe because of the very high latitude nature of it, or help with hunting or sled dog, who knows? But it's possible that the Americas gets colonized much later if people don't have dogs, or the Pacific for that matter. The Polynesians were spreading all out throughout the Pacific about 1,200 years ago, from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand, and all of them had dogs with them. And you just wonder that if you didn't have the dogs and the pigs and the chickens, which they all did, are people able to traverse that much ocean just by themselves? And, I don't know. I think there's a good case to be made that the dogs do a very good job of allowing people to at least move faster, move better, move differently to parts of the world they would not have ever visited had they not had dogs in the first place.
Right, yeah. No, it's interesting. It's so interesting. Because I'm sure back then you'd have sort of people that were maybe on their own and wanted companionship, so the dog offered that, and obviously as a guard against, the
Sure.
bigger types of deer or bear that would have been around, and then onwards from that, I mean, the sky is the limit, as we know now with dogs, what they can do for us, police dogs, army dogs, leading, guiding the blind, you name it, but
Or even sniffing out cancers or telling somebody when they're going to have an epileptic fit. I mean, the list is really pretty incredible. I mean, I would love to see like an entire compendium of everything that we've ever asked a dog to do, and the dog willingly did so. I mean, we're working on a dog now. It's a turnspit dog that in the 18th century was just running in like a giant hamster wheel and as part of a factory. And we don't use these dogs anymore, and that happens a lot too. Or drover dogs, for example, we don't do that anymore. There's a lot of dog jobs that we've asked them to do, but technology has now made those jobs anyway irrelevant. So then dogs are like, oh well, that's fine. You don't need me to do that. I'll do something else instead. Oh, cancer? Yeah, sure, I can smell that. It's fascinating the plasticity of the dog behavior and how ingeniously the two of us have found different ways for them to kind of help us out at every stage.
Yeah. There's no shortage of jobs. I mean, I know medical detection dogs well. Actually, I actually launched the charity, would you believe, in 2007. So I absolutely love the cancer sniffing dogs. That really is remarkable. But yes, that's it. That's their superpower, their sense of smell, and that probably way back 15,000 years ago was really useful to us. I mean, I don't know how our nasal passages would have been in comparison to ours today, which are pretty nondescript, but I still think this alerting and the protection aspect, and therefore this loyalty, this trust between the dog and the human would have built way back when life was a lot simpler. That, we would have felt safer with a dog, near us. And that would then build those treats by the campfire, and the
Mm.
trust would grow and grow. You know what I mean? I mean, in a way, capitalist society, Gregor, wouldn't have ever happened if dogs hadn't herded the sheep to market. We wouldn't.
Yeah, no, again, and I think they're an accelerator, right? A facilitator. They make things easier. And as you rightly point out, there's lots of different ways in which dogs make human lives much faster, much better, and able to take advantage of things that on our own we would not have been able to do.
Yeah. No, this is it. So, I mean, do you think we're going to find dogs going back 20,000 years? Will that be the next one?
Ooh, that's a $64,000 question. We are, and not just us. There's lots of teams of people out there desperately hunting because what a great thing that would be to find in an even earlier example of a genomic dog. I What's interesting to me is that we have been sequencing a lot of dogs a lot of canids between 15 and say 25,000 years ago. And everything that we've tried that's older than this one from Goss Cave at 16, it's all coming back as wolves. It's not that there's no canids there, it's that everything is a wolf and it doesn't bear any relationship to the modern dogs that we know, which is firstly interesting. But the other thing that's kind of it's just kind of this thorn in all of our sides is that what happened at between 18 and 21,000 years ago, there was the last glacial maximum. And so sea levels drop by 120 meters, all the water gets sucked up into giant ice sheets that dominate the northern hemisphere. People get kicked out of the UK, out of northern Europe. The world is cold and nasty. Like it's certainly in the northern latitude, it's not a fun place to be. And huge numbers of large mammals, all of their population sizes just plummet. And that includes wolves. And so it's really unfortunate is that as we're looking around for exactly this time period, which for us is the most interesting as we're heading back 16, 17, 18,000 years ago, is precisely the time when the number of bones that are available to us with an archaeological and paleontological context just dries up completely. Now it's tempting to say, well, maybe that's what's spurring this relationship, is that human population size take a dip, wolf population sizes take a dip. There's a handful of places that they can exist. And maybe it kind of, the climate kind of forces us together. And it's like, you guys need to cooperate now and stop competing on the landscape, because that's the only way you're all going to get out of this to survive when the weather starts warming back up in a couple thousand years. And maybe that's what's happening. And if so, it's just really kind of somewhat depressing and unfortunate that if that's the moment that it's all happening, that's our least available time period of being able to find the physical evidence for that process.
Wow, gosh. But there are papers that actually say that a dog from Canada, a Greenland dog, actually, is the oldest dog of dogs. I don't know. Some people say it's like the African dogs, the Basenji type dog, which maybe goes with your theory because that's more the southern hemisphere, although the Greenland dog maybe doesn't go with that theory. But then these dogs may not actually be as old as they seem.
No, they're really not. I mean, we're on top of all of. I've got a PhD student right now who is working very diligently and pulling together what is the actual evidence, because a lot of people can make a lot of claims, and sometimes those claims are very robust based upon a lot of empirical evidence. Sometimes it's just sort of an assertion that somebody made in a paper once and then gets reified as fact as people cite that paper without really understanding what the basis for that initial claim was. So we are just doing a whole survey and being very strict about what is not a dog, how can we determine it, how far back does it go. And yeah, I mean, we're at 16,000 now with Pinarbashi, and everything prior to that just fails is either definitively a wolf or fails the litmus test of credibility. So there's a lot more question marks about it that need a lot more evidence before we can be confident.
Oh, no, cool. No, I understand that. So, but Gregor, you do all of this by studying ancient DNA, which is different to studying modern DNA. Is that right?
Well, all ancient DNA is DNA derived from the animals who are living that far back in time. So you can look at modern DNA and you can make inferences about the past, but the beauty of ancient DNA is that it is directly measuring, looking at, and describing and kind of assessing the past as it was, because you have the bones that are that old.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? To really work out, what people and dogs were eating through to, the climate at the time, really. I mean, it's a very fascinating thing, I think. It's mad. I love it.
It's great. I mean, what I'm so thrilled about is, I started this whole thing about 20 years ago and never would have imagined that the technology would have moved to the point where we have this phenomenal degree of resolution now. I mean, the story that I tell is, for my PhD, I spent most of it, over 4 years, very heavily concentrating on just 80 base pairs, 80 letters, a combination of A's, C's, T's, and G's that was 80 letters long. That was it. In fact, I basically had them memorized. If you stare at the same 80 letters in a row, it's going to get into your head. And now, for example, from these dogs from Turkey at 16,000 years ago, for a couple of them, we got 80 billion base pairs. I mean, it's staggering. It's like 10 or 11 degrees of orders of magnitude, where it's just, this was not just a pipe dream, it was a fever dream. You would have been hallucinating in 2006 to think that you could get 80 billion base pairs out of something that was 16,000 years old. It's just incredible.
Wow, gosh, I mean, how exciting. I mean, I guess, it's like on the edge of science. I just love the thought of all this, and to think that you've actually have found the missing link, because this has been going on for years, trying to work out when the wolf turned into a dog. And so it's fabulous that you've achieved it, really.
Yeah, well, what we've really achieved is we managed. I mean, if you talk to the archaeologists, they will tell you, and they're not wrong about this, that through their mechanisms and through their ways of interpreting the past, that they would have been predicting that there were dogs at 14, 15, 16,000 years ago for ages. What they didn't have was access to the genomes. And so, far from the genomes being the kind of smoking gun of proof, it's more that we are just corroborating what a lot of archaeologists have been saying for quite some time. Now, the further back in time you go from there, the fuzzier and the hazier that things get. So I don't think that we found a missing link per se. What we've simply found is the oldest dogs that can be confirmed as dogs, both through more standard archaeological assessments as well as the genetic and isotopic element assessments, and that there is certainly an earlier dog to be found, and we've just kind of put a cap on, we know it's at least 16,000. It's probably deeper, we just don't know how much deeper.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, this has enlightened so many people because I think everybody wanted to know this. And now we've got a much better picture and we can understand the timelines more and understand, that dogs have been a part of us across the globe for so long, And this is where the man's best friend adage comes from, and that's a global thing. Well, certainly
It
in
is.
most countries, most countries.
What's really interesting to me too is that dogs. And we start at least by 16,000 years ago in Turkey, but there are several places on Earth, including South Africa and the southern tip of South America, where dogs only get there a couple hundred years ago. So yes, dogs now are ubiquitous, but it took them a very long time to get to the more remote corners of the planet from where they started in Eurasia.
That's so interesting. So where have they only been for 200 years?
In Tierra del Fuego in South America and South Africa, where the earliest evidence in South Africa on the coast of the very southern tip of South Africa is only about 500 or 600 years old. Prior to that, there are no dogs. And what's really interesting is that dogs, like a lot of things, tend to move very easily east-west across along latitudes, as it were. 40 degrees, 50 degrees. You get things rocketing east-west, no problem. But north-south presents a series of different problems because you've got large rainforest that you have to get through. You've got a whole different set of diseases. You've got a whole different set of faunal and ecological factors. And it takes people and with dogs and dogs themselves far longer to get along north-south longitudes than it does east-west along the latitudes.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I guess down to, tropical climates aren't as good for dogs, too hot. Would that be part of it?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, I think there is a lot of people have mentioned this both in South America and in Africa is that you have a completely different disease regime, and even we see this with cattle as well with the tsetse fly. Like there are things that will bite you or eat you or transmit some sort of nasty disease that your immune systems are just not good at handling, and that entire realm of the possible kinds of diseases really fluctuates as you head south past the equator and makes it very hard for things that are more used to a kind of more northern climes to acclimate to or to get kind of accustomed to. And that just takes a much longer period of time.
right, right. Well, that's also so interesting. It means that the Basenji dog probably really isn't one of the oldest dogs at all,
Oh, I
actually. But
can I can guarantee you it is not. Which isn't to say that it's not interesting. And there is a very cool history of African dogs, but it is a very late stage dog process within the entirety of dog domestication.
how interesting, how interesting. Well, listen, Gregor, I mean, as ever, this is like such an enlightening conversation. And I love your energy and your passion for this.
Well, it's dogs. How can you not be passionate, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Can I ask a question? Do you have a dog, Gregor?
I look after a Tibetan Terrier 3 nights every fortnight.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, I love Tibetan breeds. I grew up with a Tibetan Spaniel, actually.
Oh, there
So,
you go. Yeah.
yeah, they are. So, the Tibetan Terriers on the ramparts and the Tibetan Spaniel was up the Buddhist monk's sleeves, according to history. Yeah. So, what's next? Will there be another dog item to come on and talk about?
Absolutely. We've got dozens of dog stories that we're working on at any one time. And it's the domestic animal that just keeps on giving. And we just keep discovering new things. And, they are as informative and as fascinating in death as they are in life. And the stories that we're able to retrieve from the museums and from the archaeological record are just as fascinating as those when you take your dog out on a walk on each morning.
It really is. And every morning is a new day with your dog and one that should be treasured because the sad thing is, they don't live long enough. And that would be another thing to find out if the dogs back in the day lived longer naturally,
Yeah,
because
that's a good question.
there weren't any vets around then. Isn't that a good question though? I wonder if they were predisposed, from just having cleaner air, cleaner food.
Probably a much more dangerous world, though. Yeah, so it's like, as you
Well,
rightly say, like the veterinary care, and you're in trouble if you get an infection. So it's kind of hard to say, but there are some interesting genomic ways to try and assess some of that people might start to explore if we get good enough genomes from some of these things. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so many fascinating questions to ask of the past.
yeah, exactly. And we could learn about ourselves, because it'd be interesting. Because I'm sure they'd figured out the different herbs and the plants maybe to help
Mhm.
with infection,
Sure, definitely.
so maybe we're not giving our predecessors enough credit, maybe there's a lot more going on then than we kind of knew. It would be interesting. And is that all going to be achieved through studying the DNA in this ancient DNA way?
I don't think it's What's great for me is that ancient DNA is one of many techniques, and it gives you an insight into some aspects of that dog. But the really interesting aspects, I think, is when you combine all those different lines of evidence. And so the genomics will tell you that it's a dog, the isotopes will tell you what it's eating, and the cut marks on the bone will tell you how it was being treated in death, and the assemblage from when you recover it will tell you how it was either buried or tossed down a well. Or so there's all kinds of different lines of evidence and ways of interpreting that evidence that give us the whole picture of dogs throughout history. And it's, all we need is that more material to radiocarbon date it before 16,000, and maybe we'll be finding out even earlier dogs as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Never say never. Hey, Gregor. So listen, I wish you all the best with all of these new discoveries. And I really hope you'd come back on the radio show and discuss them the moment you have the all clear.
I'd be very happy to. And we've got a couple of really big fun stories in the works right now, and it'd be great to come back and chat.
Fantastic, Gregor. Thank you so much. That's our show, everyone. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. Go on, please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, of course, to Dr. Gregor for joining us today. And thanks to Mike Hansen, my producer, for all the music and the production as ever. And if you want to find out more about Antonol and indeed about NatuRaw, go to my recommends page on my website and you can redeem your special discounts. And don't forget to subscribe, because that way you never miss another show. Bye for now.